Once you stop begging for peace, you become it. You've been chasing calm as though it's a thing you must earn. You've hunted peace in the approval of others, in silver plan futures, in approval-starved relationships. But peace isn't a prize, it's a presence. It doesn't arrive at the end of your grind, it grows in the gravity of your internal surrender. Carl Jung said the self is born not in addition but subtraction, shedding borrowed narratives, expected roles, wounded identities so that what's authentic can breathe. The tragedy is not what's missing, it's what you keep holding on to. And begging for peace while carrying grief, resentment, trauma, masks, is like building a cathedral on shifting sand. This is syphoria, the spiritual fatigue of chasing serenity while fueling the very chaos you fear. You pray for quiet but post the noise. You bargain for rest but replay the drama. You think you need peace until the day you become it, not by fixing the world, but by unfixing yourself from the stories that kept you bound to disturbance. Your mindset must evolve. Belief must deepen. Clarity isn't a destination. It's the whisper beneath the roar. You don't need to prove anymore. Your vision grows not from hustle, but from alleged rest that delivered revolution. Purpose is not work, it's will aligned. Discipline becomes devotion. Action becomes choice, not compulsion. Gratitude surfaces when the begging ends, when you stop bargaining your soul for approval. Adaptability blooms when you no longer fight the seasons. Resilience is born not in clenching, but in opening to what arrives beyond control. Every act of letting go clears gravity's channel, inviting the flow that springs from truth, not from traction. The more you beg for peace, the weaker you become. Because begging fractures, it binds you to that outside validation. But the second you stop, you reclaim something radical and rare. You reclaim agency. Presence becomes your signal. Silence becomes your strength. You no longer wait. You rise. You don't chase anymore, you attract. When you stop begging, life begins to answer you with synchronicity, clarity, alignment, not because the world changes, but because you do. Every trauma untethering, every chain you drop, reveals a clarity capable of commanding reality not through force, but through frequency. Anyone can create chaos. Peace is created through fullness. You stop chasing peace, and peace instead follows. Your laughter becomes still. Your breath becomes anchor. People feel you before you speak. Not because you project certainty, but because you are it. This is the transformation of the soul. Not by gaining peace, but by becoming its vessel. Not by building a perfect life, but by clearing space for the real one to emerge. Not by fighting for visibility, but by existing with presence too magnetic to be ignored. Let silence grow inside you. Stop performing your peace epic. Stop proving your sanity in unstable rooms. Stop valuing survival memories as identity proof. Instead, let them fade. Let them teach. And become the calm that transforms storms into mirrors, noise into nuance. Your real life isn't found behind masks. It's revealed when masks dissolve. Your worth isn't calculated in external applause. It's anchored in your capacity to say no to false peace and yes to essential truth. You are not negotiating with peace, you're embodying it. So breathe, unclench, let go of the scripts. Stop staging your own catharsis. Stop constructing safety around exhaustion. Step inside your silence. And as your relinquishing becomes complete, watch life revolve around your quiet center. Not imposed, but invited. Not controlled, but commanded by presence. Now, when others ask how you changed, you don't tell. You are. You don't prove. You resonate. Because once you stop begging for peace, something primal shifts. You don't walk into rooms looking for stillness. You are stillness. Not loud, not demanding, just utterly, undeniably, peace. And from that stillness, a new kind of power is born. The kind that doesn't chase recognition, the kind that doesn't fear rejection, the kind that no longer rises and falls with the approval of people who never knew your name beneath the noise. You're not begging for peace because you've become the kind of presence that creates it, wherever you go, not by trying, but by being. And the world, for the first time, begins to respond differently, because you are no longer offering your essence for negotiation. You're no longer asking the world to validate what you've already confirmed within. You are no longer fighting to be seen, because your clarity is too undeniable to miss. And your peace? It doesn't need to be explained. It doesn't need to be defended. It doesn't need to be posted or proved or performed. It just island. It radiates from your tone. It hums in your silence. It walks with you into rooms and shifts the atmosphere before you even speak. And here's the truth. This peace didn't come from ease. It came from war. The inner war of self-abandonment. The battle between truth and trauma. The conflict between who you were taught to be and who you actually are. You didn't earn this peace through perfection. You found it through permission. The permission to stop, to surrender, to release the identity built on pain and the compulsion to explain your worth. That's what ends the begging. That's what births the presence. That's what transforms everything. Because when you become peace, you become unshakable, not untouched by the world, but unmoved by its illusions. You can hold chaos in one hand and clarity in the other. You can witness the storm, but choose not to step into it. You can feel the pull to react, but choose instead to respond from essence, not ego, from depth, not defense. And what you begin to realize is this: peace is not passive. Peace is discipline. Peace is presence. Peace is the choice to not betray yourself for temporary comfort. It is the refusal to contort for connection. It is the knowing that silence is a complete sentence, that detachment is not coldness but clarity, that boundaries are not walls, they are truths made visible. And now your very existence has become a boundary, not because you are guarded, but because you are guarded by grace, not because you've walled yourself off, but because you've anchored yourself in alignment. And from this center, from this sacred stillness, you will move through the world differently, not trying to be chosen, not trying to be enough, not trying to be loved, because you already are, because you finally chose yourself. And in doing so, you stopped begging for peace. You became it. And as you become it, something extraordinary unfolds. Your life reorganizes itself, not because you pushed, but because your frequency shifted. The relationships that once thrived on your chaos begin to fade, not out of anger, but out of irrelevance. The conversations you used to entertain dissolve into silence, not out of superiority, but because they no longer fit your nervous system. The invitations to perform, to prove, to posture, they no longer tempt you, because you've tasted the peace that comes with authenticity. And anything that costs you that is simply too expensive now. This is the threshold where many turn back, because peace, real peace, is confronting. It asks for sacrifice not of your joy, but of your addiction to suffering. It demands you leave behind the identity built around being misunderstood. It requires that you release the need to be needed. And for the first time, you're ready. You're ready to stand alone, not as a punishment, but as a declaration. You're ready to trust the silence, not as an absence, but as a revelation. You're ready to no longer be defined by trauma, but by truth. Because you now understand your power never lived in the volume of your voice. It lived in your capacity to hold the weight of your own being without apology, without dilution, without fear. So you walk, not faster, but truer, not louder, but deeper. You walk as the embodiment of the very thing you were once seeking. And the world adjusts. People feel it. They don't know what's different, but they sense it. You're not reactive anymore. You're not easily pulled into drama. You're not available for what's beneath your standards. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Because now peace is your baseline, not a reward, a requirement, not something you visit, something you are. And the more you live in that, the more your life begins to mirror it. Conversation deepen, choices simplify, movement becomes meaningful, and your presence, it becomes sacred ground, not because it's curated, but because it's real. This is what happens when you stop begging for peace. You become a home, not for chaos, not for confusion, but for the kind of presence that makes others question what they're still holding on to. You become a reminder, a mirror, a standard, a storm turned into still water, a question turned into clarity. And that changes everything. Because once you become clarity, confusion can no longer claim you. Once you embody stillness, noise can no longer control you. And once you become peace, the world begins to treat you as a force, not a function, not something to fix or fit into its machinery, but something to respect, to orbit around, to feel, even in silence. Because you are no longer the echo of other people's expectations. You are the origin of your own truth. And that truth doesn't beg. It doesn't explain. It doesn't shrink to soothe. It simply stands, unmoved, not because it doesn't feel, but because it has felt everything and still chose to stay rooted. And that is the kind of peace the world cannot imitate, because it wasn't built in luxury. It was forged in the quiet battles no one saw. It was carved through solitude, softened through surrender, sealed through soul-deep commitment. It's not performative. It's primordial. It's not calm because nothing happened. It's calm because everything happened and you chose not to lose yourself in any of it. So now, peace is not your destination. It's your aura. It's in the way you listen without needing to correct. It's in the way you leave without explaining. It's in the way you stay not out of fear, but from grounded choice. And from that space, you stop attracting what drains you. Because what used to feel like comfort now feels like cost. What used to feel like connection now feels like constriction. What used to look like love now reveals itself as dependency. Because you've raised your resonance. And your resonance does not lie. It doesn't entertain what isn't aligned. It doesn't fake smiles to keep peace. It is the peace. And peace doesn't need to convince anyone. Peace knows. So you stop trying to be understood by the chaotic. You stop trying to be loved by the conditional. You stop trying to be chosen by those who only recognized your trauma, not your truth. You don't beg for seats anymore. You build tables. You bless exits. You honor silence. Because now you've learned, true peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of truth. And when truth lives in you, peace is inevitable, unshakable, unmistakable, and finally, uninterrupted. And when peace becomes uninterrupted, you begin to taste something even deeper, freedom. Not the surface kind that parades itself in detachment, but the kind that feels like oxygen in your bones, like sovereignty in your skin, like God in your spine. You no longer look outward for regulation, validation, or direction, because you've become your own compass. You've become the quiet roar beneath your breath. You've become the calm tide that decides its own moon. This is the final alchemy of peace. It doesn't just make you feel good. It makes you godlike in your presence. Not above, not beyond, but anchored in something no storm can reach. Because real peace doesn't mean you never get shaken. It means even when you do, you never lose yourself. It means when chaos knocks, you don't open the door and surrender your center. You greet it with clarity. You meet it with standards. You don't fight it, you out-presence it. And that presence, it becomes your power. It becomes your path. And eventually, it becomes your protection. Because there's no force more dangerous to systems built on fear, shame, and control than a human being who no longer begs, no longer performs, no longer distorts themselves for approval. A human being who's simply island, soft and sovereign, rooted and radiant, calm and commanding. That is who you've become, because you let the noise pass through, because you stopped defining yourself by your reactions, because you sat with your shadows until they stopped screaming. And now you walk differently, not faster, not louder, but with gravity, with grace, with a stillness so deep it makes the frantic pause and ask, who are you? And the answer is not in words. It's in being. You are no longer the seeker. You are no longer the beggar. You are no longer the one knocking at the gates of peace, hoping to be let in. You are the gate. You are the stillness. You are the answer. And from this place, you no longer chase life. Life now flows from you. Life flows from you now, not because you conquered it, but because you surrendered to something deeper than force. Because you released the lie that said you had to hustle for harmony. Because you finally stopped mistaking rest for weakness, silence for irrelevance, softness for submission. You remembered that there is more power in presence than in performance. And now the world moves around you differently. Not because it's changed, but because your lens has. Because you no longer react from wounded reflexes. You respond from rooted wisdom. You no longer give your time to anything that steals your energy. You no longer give your soul to any place that demands your silence in return. You no longer seek to belong by betraying the very essence of who you are. You've stopped begging for peace. And by doing so, you've stepped into the source of it. You are the eye of the storm now, the still place where chaos loses its grip, the quiet in the center of noise, the gravity in the room of spinning souls. You no longer need to win arguments. You no longer need to be right. You no longer need to be understood, because you are no longer in battle. You are in alignment. And from alignment comes the miracles, the relationships that don't require translation, the work that feels like resonance, the choices that don't come from fear but from freedom. Everything you used to chase now recognizes your frequency and comes to find you. Not because you proved your worth, but because you remembered you never had to. That is the shift. That is the awakening. That is the moment you go from begging for life to love you to embodying the very love you were waiting for. And from that embodiment, everything flows. Not because you pulled it closer, but because you finally let go. And in letting go, you became everything you were always meant to be. You became everything you were always meant to be. Not by becoming more, but by unbecoming what you were never. You shed the armor they taught you to wear. You silenced the inner judge that fed on your guilt. You dissolved the version of you built for survival, and in its place you breathed for the first time, not to be accepted, but because breath itself was the proof that you are enough. And now your peace doesn't shout, it shifts. It doesn't need to enter the room first, it redefines the room entirely. People feel your energy before they hear your words. They recognize something ancient in your silence, something untouchable, because you are no longer a performance. You are a presence, a truth too grounded to be shaken, a soul too clear to be confused, a heart too full to be manipulated. This peace, it isn't cute. It's not pretty or passive. It's revolutionary because it doesn't bow to urgency. It doesn't chase love. It doesn't beg for answers. It is the answer, and anyone who cannot stand beside that energy falls away, not by your force, but by the natural law that what is false cannot endure what is real. You've become the flame that cannot be extinguished because it no longer burns to be seen. It simply burns to be. This is not about becoming the most peaceful version of you. It's about becoming the most powerful version of you, because peace is power, the kind that can't be sold, can't be stolen, can't be softened into something palatable for others. It is sacred, and now you carry it, not in your posture, but in your presence, not in your words, but in your walk, not in your defense, but in your stillness, Because once you stop begging for peace, you realize you've been it all along. You just needed to come home to it. And now that you have, nothing can move you. Nothing can make you perform. Nothing can separate you from what you already are. Whole, grounded, awake, free. Free, not as in untethered from responsibility, but free in the deepest, most dangerous way. Free from the illusions that once ruled you. Free from the stories that whispered, you must struggle to be worthy. Free from the silent contracts you signed just to feel safe. Free from the invisible chains that looked like smiles, like agreements, like loyalty to things that no longer served your soul. This freedom isn't loud. It doesn't march. It doesn't need to announce itself. It's simply island, and in its presence, everything falls, trembles. Because when you stop begging for peace and start being peace, your very existence becomes a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look. Some will say you've changed. They'll say you've become distant, cold, detached. But the truth is, you've simply become whole. And wholeness doesn't seek validation. It radiates. It moves through the world with no need to be explained. Because there's nothing left to defend. No performance left to perfect. No mask left to maintain. Just you, raw, rooted, untamed. Not controlled, but centered. Not passive, but powerfully still. And in that stillness, you hear everything. You feel everything. But you no longer absorb everything. Because now you know the difference between empathy and entanglement, between love and sacrifice, between peace and people-pleasing. You don't rescue anymore. You rise. And from that rising, you give others permission to do the same, not by dragging them, but by leading yourself. And if they come with you, good. If not, you bless them and continue walking. Because your journey is no longer up for debate. It is sacred. Your peace is no longer conditional. It is non-negotiable. Your energy is no longer currency for external survival. It is divine economy. So you protect it fiercely, lovingly, because once you've become peace, you realize the greatest violence you can commit against your soul is to beg for the very thing you now embody. You don't do that anymore. You don't beg. You be. You be not in defiance, but in reverence. Reverence for your own spirit. Reverence for the inner stillness that took decades to uncover. Reverence for the wisdom you earned through silence, suffering, solitude. Because you didn't stumble upon this peace. You forged it. You bled for it. You buried parts of yourself for it. And then, in the soft grave of your former self, something eternal awakened. It was never weakness that made you beg. It was your soul's memory of peace, craving its return. But now it has returned. Not as a visitor, but as your home. You are the altar. You are the sanctuary. You are the threshold between chaos and clarity. You are the silence that speaks before the world interrupts. And from that place, this sacred stillness within you, don't act from lack. You create from overflow. You move not to be noticed, but because presence requires movement. You love not to be loved in return, but because your love is not a transaction. It is truth, expressed, peace, shared, grace, walking. And when you're wrong, you own it. When you're wounded, you heal it. When you're misunderstood, you release it. Because peace does not cling to control. It trusts itself. It trusts that what is meant will remain. That what is aligned will respond. That what is true doesn't require manipulation. It only asks for receptivity. And so you walk with open hands now. No longer gripping. No longer guarding. No longer gathering scraps of affection or chasing moments of validation. Because you know you are whole, even when unseen. You are worthy, even when unchosen. You are sacred, even in solitude. This is not a phase. This is not a trend. This is your return, not to perfection, but to presence. Not to people, but to power. not to peace as a destination, but to peace as your birthright, your nature, your name. So walk in it, speak from it, stand as it, not because you need to show them, but because there is nothing left to prove. And as this realization settles in your bones like an ancient truth remembered, not learned, you understand peace was never something you had to find. It was never lost. It was buried beneath years of conditioning, layers of performance, the dust of shame and the fog of self-doubt. But it was always there, waiting for you to stop searching, waiting for you to stop sacrificing yourself for scraps of it, waiting for you to return. And now that you have, you don't need to announce it. You don't need to broadcast your healing or decorate your becoming. You simply live. You live as the presence that doesn't compete, the presence that doesn't chase, the presence that doesn't waver. You become the stillness that others didn't know they needed. You become the mirror that reflects what's possible. You become the frequency of wholeness, and everything that cannot match that frequency simply fades. No conflict, no chaos, just cured truth. And when people ask, how did you do it? How did you become so peaceful? You won't point to a method. You'll just smile, because peace is not a technique. It's a decision, a declaration, a devotion. And once you've chosen it not as a prize, but as a path, there is no going back. You will never again betray yourself for a moment of false belonging. You will never again shrink just to keep someone comfortable. You will never again explain your worth to those committed to misunderstanding it. Because now, you don't just have peace. You don't just radiate peace. You are peace, embodied, anchored, unshakable. And from this day forward, you are no longer the one knocking at the door asking to be let in. You are the threshold. You are the still point. You are the answer. Because once you stop begging for peace, you realize you've been it all along.